879 AD, the Novgorod prince and concurrently the leader of the Rus squad, Rurik, dies. Rurik's personality was so legendary that historians have been arguing for many centuries about who he was by origin, a Norman or a Slav. Since the arguments of the participants in this historical dispute do not stand up to criticism, we will never know who Rurik really was, but this does not matter. What is known for certain is that Rurik was the leader of a squad of Rus, the origin of which is apparently destined to remain a secret, and until 879 he ruled the Novgorod lands. However, during the reign of Rurik, as well as after him, real power over Novgorod was in the hands of the Novgorod boyars, and the prince acted only as a military leader and arbitrator, so that conflicts between the Novgorod boyars did not lead to bloodshed. The fact is that the prince's personal squad, although it consisted of experienced battle-hardened warriors, was not able to compete on equal terms with the much more numerous and well-armed Novgorod militia. And therefore the last word in any dispute was with the Novgorod boyars. One way or another, in 879, Rurik dies and leaves behind his young son Igor, who, due to his age, of course, could not rule independently. That is why Oleg was appointed regent under the young Prince Igor. It's funny that historians argue as fiercely about Oleg's origin as they do about Rurik's origin. The most plausible version is that Oleg was the brother of Igor's mother, since it is this fact that explains his appointment as regent. The problem is that it is impossible to find out who exactly Igor's mother, who was presumably named Afanda, was Slavic or Norman, and thus determine Oleg's ethnicity. Having actually become the acting Prince of Novgorod, Oleg, who for his insight and foresight would later receive the nickname Prophetic, realized that the main source of wealth of Novgorod in the entire Novgorod land was its role as a transit center on the way from the Varangians to the Greeks. Since Oleg was far from a stupid person, he understood that if he took control of most of the trade route from the Varangians to the Greeks, the amount of income received would increase significantly. Oleg realized that the forces of the squad that he received from Rurik would clearly not be enough to establish control over the entire length of the route from the Varangians to the Greeks. So he shared his plans with the Novgorod boyars. It is important to understand that the Novgorod boyars, who spent their entire lives in trade, immediately assessed the size of the potential income and therefore expressed a desire to take part in Prince Oleg's military campaign. When all preparations were completed in 882, Prince Oleg, at the head of his squad, as well as the Novgorod militia that joined him, set out on a campaign. There were no roads in those days, so Oleg's troops, whose numbers are unfortunately missing, traveled on boats. Having gone down the Lovit River, Prince Oleg's army dragged their boats to the Dnieper and soon found themselves in the vicinity of Smolensk, which was an important transit center on the way from the Varangians to the Greeks. Unfortunately, there is no reliable information about exactly how Smolensk came to be under the rule of Prince Oleg. With a high degree of probability, local residents, having appreciated the army of Prince Oleg, which at that time was simply huge, decided not to try to resist and recognized his power in the hope of saving their lives and property. Inspired by the first serious success, Prince Oleg, leaving a small garrison in Smolensk at the head of the army, continued moving along the Dnieper River towards the city of Kiev, which was the main goal of the campaign. Prince Oleg's army quickly moved forward down the Dnieper River and soon found itself in the vicinity of the city of Lubeck, the inhabitants of which, with a high degree of probability, followed the example of the inhabitants of Smolensk, and not daring to enter into confrontation with the army of Prince Oleg, voluntarily recognized his power. Having established control over the city of Lubeck, Without encountering virtually any resistance, Prince Oleg's army continued the campaign and soon found itself under the walls of Kiev, which could boast much more impressive fortifications than Smolensk and Lubeck. The legend says that Prince Oleg lured Askold and Dir, who ruled Kiev, out of Kiev by pretending to be a merchant. But this version does not stand up to criticism. The fact is that the likelihood that the princes left the walls of Kiev to personally meet some merchants is extremely low. Most likely, Askold and Dir were, like the late Rurik, from the Rus squad and somehow managed to separate from his squad to capture Kiev or conquer the entire tribe of the Polians. If we adhere to this version, then having learned that the son of the late Rurik, Igor, was with Oleg under the walls of Kiev, they decided to show respect to him and meet him in person. At this meeting, Oleg invited Askold and Dir to transfer power over Kiev to him, or more precisely, to Rurik's heir, Igor. How exactly Oleg justified his demands is unfortunately unknown, but Askold and Dir, of course, did not want to voluntarily give up the city, which, being on the way from the Varangians to the Greeks, was a source of stable income, and rejected these demands. The courage of Askold and Dir can be explained by the fact that Oleg hid most of his army, so the Kiev princes, feeling safe, categorically refused to give up power over the city, which became their fatal mistake. Hearing the refusal, Oleg declared that he and Igor were real princes, and Askold and Dir were unclear and therefore had no right to own Kiev, after which he ordered his people to kill them. Finding themselves in the face of a numerically superior enemy, the few guards of Askold and Dir, like them themselves, were killed. The news of the death of Askold and Dir, as well as the fact that under the walls of Kiev there was a huge army of Prince Oleg, quickly spread among the residents of the city, who, not wanting to risk their lives and property, hastened to open the gates to Oleg and recognize his power. After establishing control over Kiev, Prince Oleg decided to make it his residence, largely because in Kiev, unlike Novgorod, his power was unlimited. Thanks to his almost bloodless campaign to the south, Prince Oleg was able to establish control over a significant part of the trade route from the Varangians to the Greeks, and thus get his hands on a source of guaranteed income. It is important to note that the power of Prince Oleg was recognized only by the cities located on the way from the Varangians to the Greeks, and in order to secure them, he needed to subordinate the neighboring Slavic tribes to his power, on which he concentrated his efforts. The route from the Varangians to the Greeks brought Prince Oleg an impressive income by the standards of that time, thanks to which he could pay for the services of a Norman who was ready to fight for money with anyone. With the help of his squad, reinforced by Norman mercenaries, Prince Oleg rapidly expanded the territories under his control, and by 885, he was able to subjugate the tribes of the Drevlians, Northerners, and Radomici to his power. Thus, by the beginning of the 10th century, Prince Oleg managed to establish his power over territories that were huge by the standards of that time, and thus create the state of the Rus. By 907, having made sure that the entire territory of the Rus state he had created was under his confident control, Prince Oleg began to think about a major raid on the Byzantine Empire. The fact is that Prince Oleg had heard a lot about the wealth of the capital of the Byzantine Empire, Constantinople, and this information did not allow him to sleep peacefully at night. At the beginning of the 10th century, the Byzantine Empire, although it could boast of impressive economic and military power, was not going through the best period in its history. The Byzantine possessions in Asia Minor were constantly threatened by the Abbasid Caliphate, so it was on the eastern border that the emperor had to keep most of his army. Of course, the western neighbors of the Byzantine Empire rushed to take advantage of this. In 904, the Bulgarian Tsar Simeon, at the head of a large army, invaded the territory of the Byzantine Empire and was able not only to include several imperial provinces in his state, but also to force the Byzantine emperor to agree to pay an annual tribute. Prince Oleg learned about the problems in the Byzantine Empire from merchants transporting goods on the way from the Varangians to the Greeks, and decided that he was no worse than the Bulgarian Tsar and was also worthy of receiving tribute from the Byzantine Emperor. Prince Oleg, who received the nickname Prophetic for good reason, understood perfectly well that he needed to hurry to take advantage of the weakness of the Byzantine Empire, since after it had regained its strength, it would be too late. In 907, he gathered a huge army in the vicinity of Kiev, which in addition to Prince Oleg's own squad, included hired Normans and warriors from the Slavic tribes conquered by the Rus. After completing all the preparations, Prince Oleg, at the head of the army, began moving down the Dnieper River in order to enter the Black Sea to reach the outskirts of Constantinople as quickly as possible. As for the size of the Rus army, it is impossible to determine it exactly. Some historians claim that the Rus fleet consisted of 2,000 ships, each of which could accommodate up to 40 soldiers, but these data are a clear exaggeration. According to another version, the Rus fleet consisted of no more than 200 rooks. If we stick to this version, which is at least more plausible, then Prince Oleg had at his disposal no more than 8,000 soldiers, which at that time was a very impressive military force. The Rus boats were poorly suited for sailing on the open sea, so they had to move close to the coast so that in the event of a storm, they would be able to reach the shore in time and thus escape from death. Theoretically, the Rus fleet could not go unnoticed by the Byzantine patrols, but they could well have mistaken the Rus for merchants who were frequent guests of Constantinople. It was actually difficult to say, but the Russian fleet safely crossed the Black Sea and, having passed through the Bosphorus, ended up in the vicinity of the capital of the Byzantine Empire, Constantinople. It is important to mention that the Byzantine fleet of that time actively used Greek fire, which was a real miracle weapon of that time, so a meeting with it on the open sea could be fatal for the Rus. Thus, Prince Oleg took a serious risk, but luck was with him. The Byzantine Empire had a huge number of enemies, and there were not as many warships as the emperor would have liked. Therefore, by the time Prince Oleg began his campaign, the Byzantine fleet could well be sailing the expanses of the Mediterranean Sea, thanks to which the Rus fleet was able to reach Constantinople without encountering serious difficulties along the way. Without wasting any time, the Russians tried to put the Byzantine capital under siege, blocking the city from the sea and landing some of the soldiers ashore. However, Prince Oleg was disappointed. The fact is that after assessing the stone walls of Constantinople, he realized that without siege engines, his army, which did not have experience in storming such powerful fortifications, would not be able to penetrate the city. However, the main problem was not this, but the fact that the population of Constantinople in the 10th century was about 500,000 inhabitants. So taking such a city and controlling it with only 8,000 soldiers was an almost impossible task. Nevertheless, Prince Oleg, of course, did not intend to return home only after looking at the walls of the Byzantine capital. The fact is that by the time the Rus arrived, not only the Byzantine fleet, but also the Byzantine army was not in the vicinity of Constantinople. The Ruses, of course, took advantage of this, and not having the opportunity to penetrate the Byzantine capital, began to selflessly plunder its surroundings. Since Prince Oleg's army included a huge number of Normans who spent their entire lives raiding the coast, they plundered the surroundings of the Byzantine capital with incredible efficiency. Observing what was happening, the Byzantine Emperor Leo VI, nicknamed the Philosopher, realized that despite the fact that the army of the Rus, who had siege engines, would not penetrate the city, they would cause enormous economic damage to the Byzantine Empire. So according to the long-standing Byzantine tradition, he decided to come to an agreement. Having received an offer from the emperor to resolve the issue peacefully, Prince Oleg, who perfectly understood that he would not be able to take the city by storm, of course agreed. How exactly the negotiations took place is unknown, but soon a peace treaty was signed between the Rus and the Byzantine Empire, under the terms of which the Byzantine emperor agreed to pay a ransom of 12 hryvnia for each warrior of Prince Oleg. In addition, merchants from the state of the Rus received the right to duty-free trade on the territory of the Byzantine Empire, which was supposed to bring Prince Oleg, who was enriched by fees from merchants, additional income. There is a version that, in addition to paying the ransom, the Byzantine Empire undertook to pay the Rus an annual tribute. Some historians dispute the authenticity of this clause of the treaty. However, in order to stop the Rus' devastation of the Byzantine coast, the emperor could agree to pay an annual tribute and, due to the lack of a common border with the Rus state, simply not pay it. It is also worth mentioning the legend that before returning to his homeland, Prince Oleg nailed his shield over the gates of Constantinople. With a high degree of probability, this is just an invention of the chroniclers. The fact is that the Russians did not capture Constantinople, which means there was no point in placing a shield over the city gates. After concluding a peace treaty and receiving the promised ransom, the Rus army went to their homeland and soon returned safely to Kiev. A few years later, in 911, a new peace treaty was concluded between the Rus state and the Byzantine Empire, which included almost the same conditions as the previous one. One can only guess why it was necessary to reconclude a peace treaty. As a version, it can be assumed that the Byzantine emperor simply did not pay the promised tribute, and the Rus ambassadors demanded that the previously concluded agreement be confirmed and the payment of tribute begin. The emperor agreed, but since the Rus fleet did not appear in the vicinity of Constantinople, he did not begin to pay tribute to the Rus. At least there is no evidence, even indirect, that the Rus received tribute from the Byzantine Empire. Having not received the promised tribute, Prince Oleg, who was always not averse to fighting with someone, most likely planned to organize a new campaign against the Byzantine Empire. But in 912, he died. There's a whole legend describing the circumstances of his death, but its reliability is extremely doubtful. Despite the fact that Prince Oleg failed to force the Byzantine emperor to pay tribute, he succeeded in the main thing, to create the state of the Rus, which soon became the main military force in its region.